When we moved into that old 1929 house, the girls who lived across the street wouldn't step inside. They told my little sister outright, "We don't go over there. It's haunted." At the time, I thought they were joking. Kids say things. But their refusal stuck with us. A small, stubborn warning sitting on the curb like a pebble you keep kicking every time you pass it. The house was the kind you see in neighborhood walks. Tall, narrow, with a sagging porch and storm windows that rattled in wind. Inside smelled faintly of damp wood and lemon oil from the previous owner's cleaning. There were high ceilings, original molding, a cement basement with a big old furnace and layers of paint on the living room trim. Some flakes came off in your hand and revealed colors underneath, like rings in a tree. We felt lucky. It had space. It had history. We were the kind of family who liked fixer-uppers. We didn't move in thinking about ghosts. At first, it was small things. Normal, easily explainable things that, in hindsight, were the beginnings. The furnace brush in the basement was the first real moment that didn't make sense. It was one of those long, bristly brushes, about 4 or 5 feet long, hung up near the furnace. One afternoon, a couple of neighborhood kids came over to play, and someone dared them down to the basement. They came upstairs white-faced, clutching each other, and said the brush had swung all by itself. My dad laughed and said kids' imaginations run wild. He went down to check, had to move some boxes, see if something snagged the brush. He had just come back up when I heard him cursing softly, then shuffling faster. He was covered in paint, wet paint from something he'd been touching in the basement, and he looked like he'd seen a snake. He said he hadn't expected anything like that the brush had been moving as if someone had grabbed it and given it a quick swing. Everyone else shrugged it off. I couldn't. I remembered the way the brush made a soft scraping sound on the concrete like fingernails. That, we thought, was the first real sign. Then something stranger happened. We were not a family that smoked in the house, but my mother kept an old glass ashtray, something from her mother, on the back of the toilet in the upstairs bathroom. One afternoon, my mother and I were alone. We were making lunch. I went upstairs to fetch something and found the ashtray smashed in the bathtub. Shards of glass were splayed like a star. There were no footprints in the hallway. The front door was locked. The neighbors were out. Only my mom and I had been in the house for the whole morning. We both stood there, palms damp, looking at broken glass that shouldn't have been anywhere near the tub. My mother said quietly, "Well, that's not right." We cleaned it up and tried to carry on, but the image stayed. The ashtray placed on the tank, not on a shelf, and now in pieces in the tub where no one had been. Mrs. Scott was the kind of neighbor everyone had on the block. The older woman on the corner with a cardigan in every season, and a rosary she kept in the pocket of her cardigan. She'd lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone, and watched houses change hands. One afternoon she came over with a pie, and sat down like she was settling in to tell a story she had told a dozen times, and would tell again. She knew the woman who had lived in the house before us, she said. She'd noticed once, many years back, that the house had been painted black under a coat of white. "There was a time when folk did things," she said slowly, fingers folding over and over. She told us that ladies in the area whispered the name of our previous occupant and that she was queer, meaning odd, and that people said she practiced black magic. Mrs. Scott was religious and saw the world in terms of sin and salvation. Her words carried the weight of someone for whom the spiritual was close and present. She said she had seen strange visions about that woman before she died, terrible, beautiful things that she couldn't explain, and that the whole street had felt off. That was her interpretation. We listened because it fit the pattern we were piecing together, but we did not accept it as fact. It became one more thing to carry. The house's history of whispers pressed against our own daily life. After Mrs. Scott's visit, oddities multiplied in ordinary ways. Doors would be found open that we'd closed. Windows, older, stickier windows, lifted as if some pressure had changed in the room. Closet doors that had resisted our hands would close with delicate, unhurried clicks, like someone with patience testing them. The heavy metal furnace door in the basement, the one that required 2 hands and a grunt, sometimes stood open when we came down. The kitchen door latch, a small, stubborn thing, suddenly felt like someone was pushing from the other side. I remember coming into the kitchen to make coffee and bracing my foot to latch it, thinking at first there must be a draft. The house made noises. Old houses do. But there was an impatience to these noises, an insistence that kept coming back to the same doorways. There were times when we mistook one another for strangers, and those moments were the most disorienting. Once I was walking down the upstairs hallway and saw something blonde at the far end, a person moving toward the living room. I called a greeting, "Hey," and waved, smiling. There was no answer. I walked into the living room expecting to catch someone trying to surprise me. And there, on the couch, the whole family was sitting, watching television as if they had been for an hour. No one had been at the end of the hall. I felt foolish, then chilled. My brother swore later he'd seen a flash of hair and then nothing. Another time, in broad daylight, my aunt swore she'd seen a white shape hovering a few inches above the floor in the west hallway, like a person-shaped patch of light. It didn't walk so much as drift. It was shaped like a body but insubstantial, keeping level with furniture. Seeing a thing like that in the daytime, odd and sunlit, felt like the rules had slipped. We began to measure our days not by clocks, but by whether doors stayed shut. The sounds were the worst sometimes. Not loud bangs, but small, measuring things that let fear grow. There were footsteps on the stairs when no one was up. Slow creaks across the hallway floor at night. That scraping, sometimes a soft drag like a piece of furniture moving slowly across wood, sometimes like someone pacing, thinking. On more than one night I woke to the sense that something had passed right outside my door. The closet down the hall clicked shut in the middle of the night. My sister, who slept in the room next to mine some of those early years, sometimes told me she could hear someone walking the length of the house and then stopping at her door. She would hold her breath until it moved away. Kids have an anchoring honesty about fear. They don't have the vocabulary to rationalize it away, and so they record it as pure sensation, cold, waiting, noise, the feeling of being watched. It built toward a moment that, even now, I can't describe without my palms going a little clammy. The night it happened, I was 12. We had eaten late, and everyone had gone to bed at different times. The house hummed with the usual settling noises. I remember falling asleep with my hand dangling over the quilt, the lamp on in the hallway. Then I heard it. A slow, deliberate creak on the upper stair, like someone putting weight down and holding it, then moving another step. The sound came closer and closer. My skin prickled. I told myself it was the cat. There was no cat. It stopped at the bedroom doorway. I lay completely still, the way a child will when afraid but too proud to scream. The doorframe filled with a heavy shadow. Not a shape I could name easily. It was presence more than form. I could feel, somehow, an exhale, warm breath that ghosted over the thin wood of the door. It leaned in. I could hear breathing. Close. Too close. I covered my head with blankets, the weight of them against my face and the darkness so complete, I almost couldn't tell where the house ended and I began. I didn't look. I pretended looking would invite something be more solid. I listened to the breathing moving back and forth, the soft finality of a thing that had patience. It leaned closer and then receded, as if testing whether I would move. I squeezed my eyes shut and held them like jewels, because if I opened them, I would have to name what was there. When I finally looked, it was gone. I opened my eyes and the hall was empty. My heart was a bird beating its wings against my ribs. I did not sleep the rest of the night. I told my parents the next morning. They said what parents always say in those moments. We're here, it's okay. There must be an explanation. We checked the house from top to bottom. Nothing. Still, the smell of the night lingered in my memory. A faint hint of something like burning, as if a candle had been lit and extinguished somewhere in the house. Later, other nights would bring that smell again. A quick, inexplicable trace of smoke in a room where there was no candle, no fireplace lit. Once it was strong enough that my mother came out of the kitchen and said, "Do you smell that?" and then frowned because there was nothing to burn. We didn't talk about moving at first. You don't immediately leave a house full of your life because of fear. You argue with it. You put locks on closet doors. You leave lights on at night. You try to reclaim the rooms by using them. My dad brought a friend over who said it could have been the furnace shifting air, the old wood settling. But moments kept stacking, small, undeniable things, and the scaffolding of rational explanations started to wobble. Mrs. Scott would drop by and stand on the porch with that same careful look. "They told me things," she'd say, and name stories other neighbors had passed along, people who'd avoided the house, men who'd heard singing from empty rooms years ago, a one-time boarder who packed up in the night. We tried to be practical. We added brighter bulbs. We took down old curtains. We left some doors propped open and closed to make sure they weren't catching on nails. But one by one, the little protections felt like paper against something persistent. The family dynamic shifted. You could feel a threshold in everything. Who wanted to sleep where? Who would volunteer to go check the basement? Who refused to be alone in a room? My mother became wary in a way that was new to her. You could hear it in the way she moved through the hall, softer, like she was trying not to wake whatever might be dozing. There was also the neighborhood talking. People stopped asking to come over for dinner. The girls across the street refused to even ring our bell. Others would cross to the far side of the sidewalk rather than pass our gate. There's a cruelty and a protection in how communities respond to such things. Rumor shields people, but it can also become its own kind of exile. Mrs. Scott, bless her, told us more about the woman who'd lived here before. She described seeing her in those last days, windows lit with strange colors at night, and the woman not answering the door to anyone. She said the woman had visions, Mrs. Scott used that word, and that they were terrifying to watch. All of this became another layer in our heads. Is this memory of the house or memory of the people who lived in it first? Are such things attached to the place or to the story people carry about it? The longest stretch of everyone avoiding the house came after one evening when my dad had some friends over. It was one of those small, ordinary gatherings. Beer on a card table, pizza boxes leaning like paper architecture in the corner. Late, someone went down to the basement to fetch a cooler. My dad followed. A moment later he came back up and didn't sit. He took off his jacket with hands that looked like they'd been punching through insulation. "Get your coats on," he told us, voice flat. They left. No one asked why. That same night a neighbor later told us she had seen them go, bundles of men with their hands in their pockets, and that they'd spoken in low tones about not staying. The idea of coming home to your safety stripped down to its bones unsettled us. What was it that made grown men leave without finishing their beer? Eventually, after years of small escalating events, we moved. It wasn't one blow that forced us. It was accumulation. The weight of the unnameable pressing into everyday life until the house was no longer a refuge. Packing up felt like peeling tape off your skin very slowly. We sold the place. Not long after, the house was demolished and a new apartment building went up in its place. The lot changed, fresh concrete, new people. When I walk by now, I sometimes imagine the sound of the old wooden stairs replaced with the low, steady hum of HVAC, the kinds of modern sounds that swallow smaller noises. I wonder, as anyone who leaves an old place wonders, whether something of the old lingers. Do stories cling to foundations? Do memories seep into concrete and reappear in new lives? You have to understand, most of what I told you here is what I saw and felt. Mrs. Scott's account is hers. The girls across the street were another voice. Our family had its own experiences, separate but overlapping. That is why I call these accounts from residents. Not because anyone has proof, but because several different people who lived near or in that spot told their stories. They matched enough in tone to make us sit up and listen. I don't know what to call what we lived through. I don't have the language to label it cleanly. I can say we were spooked. I can say we had more nights than I care to count where we felt watched, and moments where objects moved that shouldn't have. I can say the breath over the doorway was real to me, whether it was the memory of an old life pressing against ours, some quirk of an old house, or something else entirely. I can't decide. The truth is that the house left a residue, a collection of sensations and stories that other people heard and repeated in low voices at the grocery store. Sometimes in quiet moments, I find myself thinking of the new building, of whoever lives there now. I wonder if they find their own small oddities and tell them to one another like seeds. A lost sock in the laundry room, a light that flickers without cause, a scent that has no source. Maybe the house's story continues in other forms. Maybe it's ours alone. Maybe people will always have places that are a little bit wrong, and maybe that's just part of being human, living in houses that keep some of their pasts. If you've ever lived in a place that didn't feel right, or if you have a story from your neighborhood, tell it in the comments. I'm not looking for proof. I'm looking for company in the odd and the unexplained, for the way telling a story can make it less lonely. Share what you remember. Maybe the echoes of old houses are spread among us, passing from person to person until they become a map of a town.